Happy Wednesday, you guys. Thanks for being here. This is a topic that I personally feel does not get enough attention or discussion. And so as I was thinking about last year, what can I do a masterclass on? What are some of the topics that maybe might be a little bit controversial, but also help us not only in our personal lives, but also how do those self-care techniques help us translate into better workers and be able to show up for injured workers as a result, right? So I think at some point or another, everybody on this call has dealt with grief to some degree, right? Some of us maybe more than others. And so I thought that discussing the course of how grief over time can become gratitude, or how developing a practice of gratitude during grief can help us through that grieving period to heal. I don't want to say a little bit more quickly, because there is no linear path of grief. That's not how it works, at least in my studying of grief. But that's my objective for you guys today, is to learn the connection between grief and gratitude, and then also share some tips, some strategies, some planning. And hopefully by the end of this, we can start normalizing death, because it's really the only thing guaranteed in life for everybody. You can't escape it. So without further ado, let's get into it. So my name is Lucia Galindo. I am the VP of Business Development for Rehab One Medical Group. I'm also a fitness expert. So I teach classes like yoga, indoor cycling, sweat classes like hot Pilates infused classes. And then aside from that, I also am an end-of-life coach. So I work with the dying and their loved ones through that transition period of dying. And then also I'm a board certified holistic health practitioner. So when you put all these things together, I think you'll probably be seeing bits and pieces as I go through the masterclass of each one of these kind of showing up in some way or another. I approach end-of-life coaching from a business standpoint also. So we're going to kind of get into things like wills and trusts and powers of attorneys, because if you have a plan and you're prepared, you're not caught off guard, and dealing with death can be a little bit more manageable. So I'll be approaching this from a holistic standpoint. And if you have any questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself, put it in the chat, and we'll get through this presentation together. So the agenda for today, first and foremost, is understanding the connection between grief and gratitude. We're going to get into things such as grief avoidance. We're going to get into rugs. I'll get into it, not the kind you step on, you'll see. Exploring meaning, honor, reprocessing, grief work, self-care, and then planning and normalizing. So these are just my definitions. These are not like Webster dictionary definitions, but I think just talking to people about what grief means to them, what grief has meant to me. I define grief as part of the human condition that is experienced when there's loss of dreams, time, self-esteem, enthusiasm, relationships, opportunities, and yes, of course, also loved ones. So often grief can be described as a deep sorrow. Is there any other words that describe for you guys what grief is? Maybe you can jot it down, put it in the chat, or unmute yourself. Feel free to chime in. This is interactive, so chime in whenever you feel the need to. On sort of the flip side of grief is gratitude, right? So gratitude, again, these are just my definitions. It's a useful antidote to counter the effects of unhelpful thoughts. It's a powerful source of healing. It's the ability to find happiness, gratefulness, and thankfulness, even when life is painful and sort of messy. It's relishing in experiences, in moments and loved ones. So almost a sense of living in the moment, being present. It's showing appreciation and acknowledging the goodness in life, which sometimes, especially when you're dealing with grief, really, really hard to do. But hopefully we'll get into some ways of having gratitude show up even at the deepest, darkest points in your life. And then overall, it's sort of a positive state of being, right? If somebody is grateful, it's really hard to be grateful and negative. So choosing gratitude, an attitude of gratitude, usually always a pretty good idea. So then how can these two sort of concepts that live on what we might perceive as opposite sides of the spectrum, how do they coexist? We can embrace our grief and burn it as fuel for our grief journey. So I'll say that one more time. So we can embrace our grief and use it as fuel for that journey of grief, because, you know, there are stages of grief that people talk about. Some people might think that grief is very linear. And I will tell you that in my experience as an end-of-life coach and in my personal experiences dealing with grief, it's not linear at all. It's different for everybody. So using that and burning it as fuel can really, really help and empower you through that process. Grief keeps the heart fluid and soft. And this, I think, is what makes compassion possible. In a moment of grief, there's almost a sense of vulnerability, and we'll get into some of that in a moment. And I think having that openness is what allows us to almost love a little bit more, maybe not take things for granted. So grief and gratitude, they both live in the same heart, in your heart. And sometimes one might surface a little bit more than the other. And sometimes it can feel overwhelming, and that's very normal when you're dealing with grief, but just realize that they live in the same home, in the same home. So just like siblings might fight, eventually they love each other again. I believe that this is how they coexist as these concepts. So there's room in your heart for both pain and joy, and both tears and laughter. We grieve because we loved. Practicing gratitude while suffering with grief does not feel instinctual or natural, but I would say that it is healing, and it can, speed up the process of healing, so that you can continue to cope with life and work and being a mom and being a wife or being a husband, being a father, a mother, a brother, those kinds of things, those relationships, those roles. Any questions so far? Y'all good? Y'all good? Okay. This is kind of, I'm going to bring up the cameras real quick. This is kind of a topic, you guys, that is, it's heavy. And I don't know where you guys are in your path of grief. I don't know if somebody just died yesterday. I don't know if somebody just died 2 weeks ago, a month ago, 3 months ago, a year ago. Maybe it was 10 years ago, but it feels like 10 days ago. So if any of this is heavy on your heart, is heavy on your soul, please speak up. This is a safe space. Okay, let's talk about what you're feeling. I'm going to keep going, but definitely unmute if you have any comments or questions or concerns. So one of the first things that I wanted to get into, because it's very real, is grief avoidance. Death is unfamiliar. And I think that it's safe to say that for many of us, it's foreign. It's something that we kind of don't want to discuss because we don't know what happens after, right? In talking to people, they're like, well, I don't know what happens after, so I'd rather not talk about it. I don't know where I'm going, and that brings me anxiety, so I'd rather not talk about it. We also live in a culture where it's almost taboo to talk about death. So as a result, we just avoid it. And so when that time comes, because it's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when, you're kind of caught in the next section here, unprepared, right? You don't know what to do. You're caught off guard. It could be a sudden death. It can be a very traumatic death that you either experienced yourself. Maybe you saw something happen. Maybe it was a loved one. Maybe it was a stranger. You witnessed a car accident. But being caught off guard can be even more challenging. Dealing with grief alone is very hard, but even more challenging when you're caught off guard and unprepared. Another reason why we avoid grief is because we're kind of speechless. We don't know what to say. We don't know what to say. We don't know how to say it. And so sometimes we just don't say anything at all because we don't want to rock the boat. And I don't know if you guys are with me on this, but I know I've even been in this situation where somebody I love has lost somebody, and I don't know what to say. So more importantly, I think I wanted to cover what not to say. So saying things like, well, it's a blessing in disguise, or, now they're in a better place. I wouldn't go there. I wouldn't go there with your friends or loved ones that are experiencing death. Also saying things, it sounds very beautiful on the surface, but saying things like, let me know if you need anything. A person who's grieving doesn't know what they need. They don't know how they're going to get what they need. They don't know how to communicate their needs because they're dealing with funeral arrangements, celebrations of life, finances, assets, family fights over what happened, what could have happened. The discussions that take place are just insane, right? So saying, let me know if you need anything, maybe change that into, hey, on Tuesday, I'm going to be in your area. I'd like to drop off some food. People need to eat. And in these times, it's really hard to find the appetite for food. So think about it that way. Also saying things like, I know how you feel is probably not the best thing to say because you don't actually know how the person feels. How we respond to death is very unique. We all take a different path when we're dealing with grief. So saying to somebody, I know exactly how you feel, probably not the best solution. Instead, saying things like, I can only imagine how you feel is very different. It's received very differently. Telling somebody everything happens for a reason, probably not the best idea, but saying something like, I'm really, really so sorry for your loss, and it's genuine, that comes across as a little bit different. Saying things like, stay strong. I think it's better, in my professional opinion, my humble opinion, to say things like, whatever you're feeling, it's okay. If you're feeling sad, if you're feeling mad, if you're feeling frustrated, I'm here if you need to talk, and it's okay, whatever you're feeling. Saying things like, don't worry, time heals all wounds. Probably not the best thing to say when somebody's dealing with the grief. Instead, you can say, do you want to share with me your favorite memory about your grandmother? Or do you want to share with me something that makes you smile when you think about so-and-so? Also saying things like, let's say somebody lost their husband as an example, and you're like, well, you can always marry again. Probably, I know we all probably know this, but in the heat of the moment, when you're caught off guard and somebody's lost somebody, you don't know what to say, and you think that these are the best things to say. And it really can be hard because now you're making that person feel that that person can be replaced, that that person was almost meaningless. And you don't have that intention, right? You come from a good place of support and love, but maybe instead saying, so-and-so will never be replaced. Nobody else can be that person. So-and-so was so special for you. And I can only imagine what you feel. Very, very different. The last thing I want to say, one of the things that you probably don't want to get into is when somebody's grieving, talking about your grieving experience. So when you start to bring up your experiences, it almost discounts what they're going through. And by making it about yourself, it's no longer about them. So as an end of life coach, one of the things that we learn right off the bat is this concept of deep active listening, which actually is not talking very much. You're asking open-ended questions and you're letting them get things off of their chest. So if you want to be supportive to somebody, then I think the best thing to do is just to listen and not make it about yourself. Grief avoidance. Another reason why we might avoid grief is because it's dark and it's lonely, and none of us, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't take classes in high school. We don't take classes in college about how to cope with death. So you feel alone, you feel isolated, you have these dark thoughts, you don't know where they're coming from, how to deal with them. And then it's obviously, if you don't know, it's unfamiliar, it's dark, it's lonely, you don't want to go there. So you kind of just push grief to the side. I'll deal with it later. I'll deal with it later. And that's probably the worst thing you can do, because like a volcano, it's eventually going to erupt. And in that process, you might be pushing people away that are just trying to help. So just be aware if that's you, or if that's somebody that you know or love. The other thing is anticipatory grief. So this is something that I actually didn't know until I did my training through Inelda. If somebody in your life is dealing with Parkinson's, dementia, Donna, you mentioned that you have a friend there at home whose loved one is on hospice right now. So the person's going to die. You just don't know exactly when. This concept of anticipatory grief is grieving somebody while they're still alive. Because if somebody is suffering from like a neurological condition, dementia, Parkinson's, You see it. Everybody sees it. That person is slowly dying. ALS, these things take a toll on you because you're preparing for that final moment, but it could be weeks, could be days, it could be months, it could be years. You don't really know. So you're constantly, it's like carrying a heavy backpack that's only getting heavier and heavier and heavier, and you're fatigued and you're exhausted and you're emotionally drained. And then the day comes that they pass, and you're almost, you've dealt with anticipatory grief, you're almost relieved to some sense, right? Because the burden has been so heavy. So in a nutshell, that's grief avoidance. There's a lot more that we can get into, but we won't, not today. Rugs. So this was, I think, one of the most beautiful concepts that I learned about in my training. So rugs is this. Rugs is regrets. It's unfinished business. It's guilt, and it's shame. So the reason I bring this up, maybe you could benefit from dealing with these things now, right? So maybe you're not on your deathbed right now, but you know somebody who has been on their deathbed, or maybe you know somebody who knows somebody who's been through this. And anybody on their deathbed will usually have one of these things come up in conversation. I really regret XYZ, right? So regret is a disappointment. It's a lost opportunity. It's if only I would have, or I should have. So when you start to hear those words, those are regrets. And so if y'all can address your regrets now in life, when you can verbalize things, when you're super coherent, when that time comes for you, you are going to have hopefully a more peaceful transition if you do the work now, and if you encourage the people around you to also do the work. The U in rugs is for unfinished business. So something that needs to be dealt with. For my mom, before she passed, she was fixated. She would not stop. I have to clean out the storage. I need everything out of the storage. And we didn't know that she was going to pass. She may have known unconsciously, but for her, her unfinished business was, I've got to clear out the storage. Nobody really understood why that was so important for her, but it was very important for her. And we all made sure that it was taken care of, because having a to-do list where you were not able to check those things off, when that time comes for you, you feel that things have not been resolved, that there's things I wish I could have still done, right? So if you handle those things now, and again, living more present in this gratitude attitude can help you to cleanse your to-do list of those items. The G in rugs is for guilt. So it's a conflicting emotion about our behaviors. So guilt is sometimes like, I did something bad, whatever that could be. It shows up in different sort of flavors, right? So if there's something that somebody did in their past and they are feeling guilty about it, when they're approaching the end of their life, they want to get it off their chest. So if there are things that maybe you feel guilty about, like, oh gosh, this one time I yelled at my kid and it's still kind of, it really makes me feel unsettled. And I just want to clear the air, because if something were to happen to me tomorrow, I want this kid to know that I love him, that I love her, and what I said was hurtful, but I didn't mean it, or I'm very sorry. Deal with those guilt situations, because it makes a world of difference. The S in rugs is for shame. So it's a self-conscious emotion, and it's more related to who you are as a person. So if there was something that took place, and it's more of a feeling of, I am bad. So guilt and shame, some people take them as like interchangeable. Guilt is, I did something bad. It was a behavior. Whereas shame is, I am bad. Like you literally feel like you are a bad person for having done something. And it's related to you as a person, something that you did. So when you are dealing with these things here, and you're on your deathbed, or you know somebody who is, it is very hard to find an attitude of gratitude. It is very hard to deal with grief if you also have these things that you're working on with somebody who's about to pass, right? So a lot of times people, the loved ones of the dying person, they want to get these things off their chest just as much as a dying person. So why not make that time now, right? To get these things off your list. The next thing that we're going to cover is called exploring meaning. So meaning, scrapbooks. right? I don't even know if people scrapbook anymore because that's kind of like an old school thing. Some people have memoirs. They've always said like, oh, I want to write a memoir, but you keep putting it off because you're like, I've got time, I've got time, I've got time. When that time comes, you're not going to have time. You're not going to have energy. You're not going to have the wherewithal to get through writing a memoir. There are people who can help write memoirs, but it's not quite the same. If you're an avid writer, if you're enthusiastic about doing this on your own, don't put off for tomorrow what you can do today. Sometimes exploring meaning means writing letters to someone. I actually just talked to a friend recently who said, you know, I had a really, really tough relationship with my dad growing up, but I think I'm finally ready to resolve, you know, that. I just don't know how to do it. And I said to him, I said, have you ever considered writing him a letter? Because maybe talking is too difficult, or even texting is just, it's not the right avenue. Why don't you write a letter? Because you can get everything off your chest. You mail it to him, and on his own time, he can read it. And then he can read it again. And then he can read it again. And he can read it as often as he wants. And when he's ready to reach out to you, you're giving him the power. The ball's in his court to now reach out to you, right? So some people that are on their deathbeds wish that they could have written letters to people that were meaningful. Usually the letters have to do with gratitude, believe it or not. The other way of exploring meaning is through music. So some people might have composed music their whole lives, and the way that they explore meaning is through music. And maybe they want to leave that behind for their next generation. So thinking about how you can explore meaning in your life. What are the things that are meaningful for you? And how can you leave that to the people in your life that are significant, right? Or helping people who are in the process of transitioning either soon or very soon, and getting these things in order. Like, hey, I've always, like, if you hear somebody say, I've always wanted a scrapbook, but now I've been told I only have 3 months to live. Take action. Where are your scrapbooks? Where are your pictures? Let's do it and be excited about it, because they're on the downhill. They're losing energy. They're losing steam. They're losing momentum. But having somebody explore meaning when they're at this chapter of their life is really, really meaningful. Some people have always dreamed of starting a charity. And this would be a great opportunity to, as they're approaching death, or as you're in your best in your prime right now, maybe do that now. Why again wait until, you know, you're out of stamina to take on something like starting a charity? The time is now. So those are exploring meaning. There's honor. So I believe that one of the best ways to deal with grief, to process grief, is through honoring the person that you loved. And some of the ways, these are just a couple, there are so many other ways, and maybe you guys can chime in the chat or unmute yourself. Some people create playlists. So playlists that remind them of that person, using Spotify or Apple Music or whatever. And then when you're feeling like, oh, I really could use a conversation with this person, just put that playlist on shuffle and just honor them through music that is reminding you of them. The other thing is a hobby. Like maybe this person was a fanatic when it came to knitting or crocheting, or maybe they were super into chickens. I don't know. I'm just making these things up on the fly, but maybe having a little statue of a chicken when you come into your house every day reminds you of that person. And in that way, you're honoring that person. In some cultures, it's very common to build an altar or a shrine. In my culture, I'm Mexican, so we do Day of the Dead. And so I was able to celebrate Day of the Dead last year for my mom, the first one, and I built a shrine for her. And it was super, super beautiful. As I'm hand selecting the items that were going to be put on the altar, I was literally kind of just, you know, having a moment with each object and just thinking, wow, like this object really makes me think about my mom because, you know, and I kind of have this conversation with myself, put it down on the shrine, and then on to the next object. And it can be a really peaceful ceremony, if you will, where you are finding a sense of closure. And it can be an annual thing. And you'd be surprised. Like I already have picked out little things for this year's Day of the Dead that are going to be different than last year's, right? So it'll kind of just build upon itself year after year. Some people definitely have funerals, and that's amazing. That's great. Some people have celebrations instead. They have celebrations of life. Other ways to honor somebody who has passed is getting a tattoo And that sounds maybe a little bit more taboo, but there are exercises that I did with my end of life coaching classmates. And we came up with this whole scenario about this imaginary person that had passed and they loved frogs. And so we said at the deathbed, this person was going to be on hospice and there was going to be a seat in the shape of a frog. And so everything was very frog themed. And then at the end, there was a tattoo artist that was there at the home where the person passed that was administering and tattooing people on their way out with little frogs. So then you can really make this more of a celebration of the person's life versus, you know, the sadness that obviously everybody's going to feel. But in this sort of stage of honoring the person, you'd be surprised at how you can transform the energy in the room and in that space with a celebration, even at a funeral, if you decided to go that route. So that's honor. And then there's reprocessing. So when you're reprocessing, I know that a lot of us are going to be able to relate to this. It feels like a roller coaster. It feels like a roller coaster. It feels like not just any roller coaster, not out in the sunshine where you can see the turns and you can see the drops and you can more or less tell the speed. But in this roller coaster, you know, it's in the dark. It feels a little bit out of control. The roller coaster is going to do what it wants. And you're often feeling like you're blindsided by the turns, by the drops. You don't know what's coming. So when you're reprocessing grief, know that these feelings are very normal. These feelings are going to feel a little bit beyond your grasp, like you cannot control them. Another analogy during this reprocessing is it's almost like you're in a vast forest. You feel lost. You're in this state of disbelief. You're in denial. Everything feels a little bit surreal. You're just like, what is happening? Am I really here? Oftentimes people describe the reprocessing as you're, you know, again, processing after a person has passed as this heaviness. And it's often described as invisible weights on all of your extremities. So your wrists have these weights. And it's not like the Pilates weights that you intentionally put on your wrist so that you can tone your arms. It's heavy. They're like 20-pound weights that are just weighing you down. You've got ankle weights on your ankles. So every step just feels like work. It feels like you're constantly being exerted. One step, one arm swing, everything is really, really heavy. Also not abnormal to feel that way when you're dealing with grief. And then something that we've already talked about is that in the reprocessing, it's not linear. It's not like, okay, the person has passed. Okay, I'm feeling sad. Okay, I'm feeling less sad. Okay, I'm back to normal. Not so much. When you're dealing with grief, your focus is going to not be the same. Your concentration is going to be affected. You are probably going to be experiencing unpredictable shifting emotions. So it's almost like that tide, right? Sometimes you feel like you're underwater and then all of a sudden you can, you know, gasp for air when that water clears. So thinking of the reprocessing and the grieving process as not linear will help you to just know that what you're feeling is very real, what you're feeling is very normal, and there really doesn't have to be an end. And I'm going to get into some of my favorite quotes in just a moment. Reprocessing is also forming a new identity, right? Your entire world has just changed by the loss of this person. The familiar patterns, they're gone. Everything feels unfamiliar, strange, out of place. Your future is unknown. Roles are shattered. And sometimes you feel that you need to change as a person to step into the role of the person who's passed, or you need to change as a person to make the person who's passed sort of proud of you, kind of living in their legacy, carrying that torch for them. So it can be really interesting because people can say things to you like, gosh, you're just not the same person anymore. And if you're not ready for that kind of a comment, you can really take it the wrong way. Like, what do you mean by that? Like, what are you trying to say? But if you realize, no, yeah, you're right. Like, I'm not the same person. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because I love this person so much and now they're gone. And I've been forced to kind of reassess my values, traditions. What are the holidays going to be like? Right. So these things that are going to change you as a person. In fact, I would say if you don't change as a person, I want to know your tips and I want to know your tricks. Grief work. So this is sort of like the peak of our presentation here. So when you're dealing with grief, there is there's a path from pain to peace. There is. And I couldn't tell you when that is, when that's going to take place for you, because it's different for everybody. But we go from having this tremendous amount of pain to having, I won't say 100% peace and feeling like the pain is completely gone. But you do feel a little bit more at ease. You're able to go back to some of your normal day-to-day activities. You're able to step out into the world and do some of the things like, you know, you see families together at the beach, and maybe the beach was your happy place with your mom. And you're like, gosh, I can't go to the beach anymore. Over time, you start to find yourself, you know what? I kind of want to go to the beach now. I think I'm ready. So you go from this place of pain, deep sorrow, to peace. I'm on a mission to normalize death. In fact, I'm in the process of setting up death cafes. And I know that sounds really crazy, but it's a thing. And I want to start having conversations with people about their grief, about the experiences that they've witnessed, about their reactions to death, about their experiences, if it was a medical death, like in a hospital setting, if it was hospice, if it was like a home health situation. I'm interested in knowing what those experiences were like. I'm interested in knowing how grief shows up for people. So I'm on a mission to normalize death. And I would encourage you to maybe start having conversations, if you feel comfortable, with whoever you feel comfortable with, so that over time we have this trickle down or trickle up or trickle sideways effect of normalizing something that is inevitable for you and for me and for everybody around us. After somebody passes, we touched on this already, but there is a rebirth, a recycling that happens. And I think that it's a tremendous opportunity to reevaluate relationships in your life. You really get to know your tribe when you experience loss. People that show up for you are going to be the people that you want to keep close. Those are your people. Keep them close. So in this process of redefining yourself, of rebirthing, realize the people that show up for you and know that they're on your journey. They're there to support you, and they're going to accept you no matter how you turn out at the end of this. So no more silence. I encourage you, there is no such thing as a bad emotion related to the grieving process. You don't have to be silent. You're not alone. I promise you, everybody around you has dealt with this. And if you start to open up, you encourage them and you give them the courage to start speaking up. You can help people work through their fears and anxiety around death. I started to actually talk to my boyfriend about, hey, when I die, very excitedly, right? I was like, when I die, do not give me polyester sheets. I want my sheets to be green. I want them to be fleeced because my extremities, my hands and my feet are always cold. I want really comfy, warm gloves and like little booties on my feet. I want to be warm. I want to be cozy. I want like patchouli scents in the room. I want to be near a window, preferably outside. But if I can't be outside, definitely by a window. And I want the window open, right? So having your thoughts on how you want to handle that situation, being in control now, setting up a plan now, helps you to feel less out of control when that time comes. And I promise you, it makes a world of difference. Challenges that you are going to be experiencing can show up in different ways, right? Like one of the things that I experience is bereavement is a effing joke. I'm just going to say it's a fucking joke. So somehow you lose your mother, your sister, your brother, a very, very close family member. And some companies offer you 1 day. It's like, oh yeah, let me just in 1 day magically just bounce back and be myself, be productive, be focused, be concentrated on my work. Like what? Be showing up to meetings where the camera's on and not lose it all of a sudden, right? No, there's no way. So we're all going to be faced with different challenges when we're dealing with grief. And I'm here for you anytime you want to talk. Anytime you want to talk. My cell phone number is going to be on the last slide. My email's on the last slide. You can email me, call me anytime you need. But just know that every challenge that shows up, you are capable of working through it. And you have a support network around you if you just have the courage to start normalizing the conversation. Self-care. So this is something that is going to allow you on the path of grief, on your unique journey, to start finding a little bit more gratitude. So shifting from grief to gratitude does require self-care. So some of the exercises that we discuss in self-care doesn't necessarily have to do with like, oh, have a spa day. Like, yeah, that sounds great, but not everybody can afford a spa day. Spas are super expensive. Not everybody feels comfortable going to the spa, right? We're still sort of in a pandemic. So keeping those things in mind, I decided to come up with a list here of self-care techniques that you might consider that are, for the most part, actually, they're all, for the most part, free. So journaling, write down your feelings, write a poem, have a gratitude diary. This is something that people are doing, and they're finding, there's actually studies that the more gratitude you are experiencing in your grieving journey, the quicker the path to healing from that grief. So writing about the things that you're grateful for, even if it's just like, I drank a hot cup of coffee today and I felt warm and cozy. Maybe that's the one thing that stood out to you today. So journaling is a great technique. Guided imagery, it can be a little bit emotional, but maybe there's a memory that you have with this person going to get a foot massage. I don't know, going to a garden, going to Mexico, eating a popsicle, sitting on a picnic bench, having a picnic at a park, something like that. You can kind of guide yourself, and I'm happy to get into this with anybody that wants to one-on-one, and for free. I'm not here to profit off of this. So guided imagery can basically take you back to that place. You can smell the smells that were in that place. You can hear the laughter. You can visualize the very small details of those experiences, and it can really help in the grief recovery. Also, a mantra. So a mantra can be anything that you repeat when you're having those thoughts, the deep, dark thoughts that we've all had. What is your mantra? I say a prayer that my mom taught me in Spanish when I was very, very little. It's in Spanish. And I say that prayer every morning when I wake up since her passing. And it brings me a lot of peace, a lot of joy. And I feel like now it just sets the tone for the rest of my day. And I know every day is a good day if I started off with that prayer. But it doesn't have to be religious. It can be a mantra like, I am at peace. It could just be the word peace. And every time you feel like you need it, peace. Put up little Post-its around your computer, peace. Maybe the peace sign. Maybe you can just put up the peace fingers, right? So there's different fun ways of making that happen. Sleep hygiene. So when we're dealing with grief, your sleep is going to just get messed up. And that's just what happens. Sometimes you get nightmares of things that maybe you witnessed in that passing phase, in that transition. Sometimes, you're processing so much and you're trying to navigate through these muddy waters that you try to go to sleep and your brain cannot shut off because of all the processing that's taking place. So things like a heavy blanket really, really help. And if you're like, what do you mean a heavy blanket? I can send you guys a link, send me a text message and I'll get that to you. But those can really, really be helpful. It's almost like a hug of support the entire night. And it really, really helps. The other free thing that you can do is exercise. So by exercising, you're releasing neurotransmitters and endorphins. These are your happy hormones. You don't have to have a gym membership. You don't have to have fancy shoes. You don't have to have any shoes. You can go barefoot, go hike in the mud somewhere, dip your toes in the ocean. You guys are in Florida. I know it's a little cloudy today, but it's still sunny enough to dip your toes in the water. It's very grounding to be in the sand. It's grounding to be in that salt water. So exercise, get in the sunshine. It's free and we don't do it enough. You got to admit it. We don't do it enough. Mental health. So there are MFTs, marriage and family therapists that can help through this grieving process. There are actually grief counselors that specifically specialize in grief work. There are psychologists. There's also EMDR. If you guys have ever heard of this, it's a technique that's used to heal trauma. There's also, I put this one on here because it's a little bit untraditional, non-traditional, and I think it's important to discuss it, mediumships. And I know that it's a little controversial, but I'm here to kind of just open up, these newer ideas that maybe you haven't heard about. So a mediumship is somebody that has the ability to connect with people who have passed and serve as a channel so that you can maybe find healing and closure through that avenue. but some of the more traditional and very effective modalities are seeing a counselor, a psychologist, a mental health specialist that specializes in grieving. Those kinds of things can really also help with your self-care. And also talk to a friend. You'd be surprised. It's free, and they probably have some knowledge nuggets that they can share with you from what they've learned in their processes. So planning and normalizing, this is our last, one of our last slides. Advanced healthcare directives. So just by a show of reactions, can you guys tell me, or just put it in the chat or whatever, maybe thumbs up, how many of you guys know what an advanced healthcare directive is? Anybody? I do. Yay, yay. Good, Janet. Beautiful, Virginia. Yes, Liz. Awesome. Okay. Thank you, April. Beautiful. So how many of you, now that we know what it is, how many of you have one in place? Yes, Janet, I agree. Liz, girl, you're ahead of the game. It's not a game, but if it were, you're ahead. You do too. Virginia, great. Amazing. Yes, so Diane, that's a great point. So you do, but it's old and you probably need to update it. The best practices as an end-of-life coach, we're told that we should encourage people to update it once a year. Depending on your health, your age, you might be like, that's a little extra. I don't need to do it every year. But I would say definitely look at it. Sometimes, this isn't funny, I shouldn't laugh, but sometimes we have people listed that are no longer with us. So how effective is that going to be? You're appointing somebody who's no longer with you to speak for you? Like, that's not going to work. So definitely update it if it's an old one. I deal with sadness and pain through humor. So I hope that's okay. I hope I'm not being insensitive. I'm not insensitive. And Janet, that's a really good point. Make sure it's complete, it's correctly filled out. Sometimes if it's not filled out correctly and that time comes, they're like, this isn't done correctly and it will not be respected and it will not be honored. So one of the things that I've done, that's right, non-void. One of the things that I've done is I have created a little hyperlink in the PowerPoint. See if it works. Moment of truth. There we go. So this advanced directive form gives you by state your advanced directive form. So I'm actually going to put this in the chat. And if you want it, you can have it. The other thing, because I live in California, I did pull up the specific California. So I'll put that in the chat as well. And it's a good idea to just, even if you're like, I'm not really ready to go that route yet. I don't think I need an advanced healthcare directive in place yet. That's fine, but just know what it is and just start thinking about, who would be able to make difficult decisions for me if I couldn't speak for myself? Just start formulating a plan, even if it's not on paper, even if it's just here for now, you're ahead of the game if you're thinking about these things. So just a little, a personal story that I'll share with you. My mother and I put an advanced healthcare directive in place and a healthcare power of attorney in place in 2014. This was like, she was super happy, super healthy, nothing going on, but she was a caregiver her whole life. And me being a holistic health practitioner, being kind of a tough cookie, I work in the medical field full time, so I'm very comfortable communicating with physicians and healthcare practitioners. And I know the system well enough. We did this, and I'm going to tell you, we did it behind my family's back. My father didn't know that we had this in place. My sister didn't know that we had this in place. It was like our little secret. So all of a sudden, I take her to the emergency room on a Sunday. She passed away on Tuesday, right? But I took my document with me when I went to the emergency room. They were not able to separate me from my mother's side because of this document and because I held true to everything that was in this document. And I was able to speak for her, and they tried to kick me out. And I just said, I'm her interpreter. I'm here to make decisions for her because she did speak English, wink, wink a little bit, but I was her interpreter. And she had a DNR in place. She had specific wishes related to some of the pharmaceuticals administered when you were being admitted at that time for, let's say, COVID. So there were very, very, very strict things in place with that document. We had things in place related to something that was important to her, meaningful to her. She was Catholic and her entire life. So she wanted her last rite, right? So she wanted a chaplain in there. So nobody in my family would have been able to stand up and speak for her in all these areas, because it was a very difficult decision to say, do not resuscitate and do not administer these meds, knowing that some of these meds could have potentially saved her life. But I'm making a decision to stay true to these documents because she trusted me with this job, right? And so that's when I knew I was born to be a doula, an end-of-life doula, because I was like, wow, if I can do it for my mom, I think I can do this for anybody. So having these documents in place, if they're well written, if they're updated, if they are accurate, and if you have a person appointed that's going to carry out your wishes no matter what, find yourself a tough cookie, because you are going to be tempted and challenged. And some family members are going to say that they disown you for the decisions that you're making. But what did you do? You did what was right, and you stood by the document that you are honoring. It was signed, right? Notarized and everything. It's a living document. There are wills and testaments that you can have in place. And this is for things like assets, property, guardians. Like if you have children and you're like, I do not want my child to go with grandma so-and-so. So find out the best person to take care of your children, your grandchildren, like all that stuff. There's trusts that you can have in place. So this is like a fiduciary arrangement. Who's going to administer your trust if you have one? There are power of attorneys. So these are legal authority to make decisions for you. And there are healthcare power of attorneys, and there's also financial power of attorneys. And then there are things like these choices here. So you can have a DNR, which is do not resuscitate. Some of these concepts might be a little new, so I am going to get into them because I think it's important that you know. You also have the choice to VSED. So VSED is voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. Sometimes physicians and the healthcare system, I'm going to say it, it's a little controversial. They're incentivized financially to keep you alive. There, I said it. It's true. It's true. They are. And you, as the dying person, or you as the appointed person to make healthcare decisions, have the right to stop eating and drinking so that you can end your own life and take control one last time of that final decision so that nobody can take that away from you. You do have that right. Nobody's going to talk to you about that, but you do have that right. And then there's medical aid in dying, or medical assistance in dying. So this is something that you guys may or may not have heard about. It's becoming more mainstream. Canada has started toying around with this idea of basically allowing people who meet criteria, there's criteria that needs to be met, but they are allowed to decide when to die. And it's usually a pill that's administered. And there are certain criteria around it. You have to meet those eligibility requirements, I guess you can say. But this is a concept that is sort of newer, but it is becoming a little bit more stream, at least now in Canada and coming to the United States. There are things like hospice that can be arranged. And this is where a team of healthcare practitioners are going to hopefully meet you in your home and allow you to pass in your home, but it could also be in like a skilled nursing facility, places like that. There's also comfort care. So it's keeping the person as comfortable as possible. So that's what we did for my mom. We did basically a morphine drip. So it was basically, she didn't want to do the VSED. I kept feeding her ice chips, even though they said she has fluid in her lungs. We should not be giving her water. I said, I understand that. She wants ice chips, and we're going to give her ice chips. And we're going to do comfort care. This is what we're doing. So we did the morphine drip, and then over time, she passed by basically the organs shutting down slowly. But you have those choices. Those are your rights. And it's important that you know what those are, because at the heat of the moment, in the heat of the moment, nobody's going to tell you what you have choices for. They're going to kind of make those choices for you clinically. And then let's see here. Oh, so the person grieving, and I think you guys can all agree, may have to go through one or more of the following: rebuild their personal identity, rediscover a sense of meaning and purpose in their life, re-examine their spiritual orientation, relearn how to open their heart. That's a tough one. Redefine the inner bond they have with the person who died. You can continue that bond, you guys. It doesn't have to end at death. And then these are some of my favorite quotes that I wanted to share with you guys. Let's see if I can get this guy down. So never forgotten. I think of things you used to say and all that you would do. At some point every single day, my thoughts will turn to you. To lose you was a bitter wrench. The pain cut to my core. I cried until my tears ran out, and then I cried some more. This wouldn't be your wish for me, that I'd be forever sad. So I try to remind myself of the happy times we had. I know I can't be with you now, and you can't be with me, but safe inside my heart, you'll stay. That's where you'll always be. If you simply can't understand why someone is grieving so much for so long, then consider yourself fortunate that you don't understand. True, huh? That's so true. May love be what you remember most. Like scattered seeds, memories bloom forever. Let's see if I can unpin. Oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to unpin this guy. Moments I had taken for granted, mostly because I assumed there would be 1,000 more. And then this one is really interesting here. So this is very common. So they'll say, here are the stages of grief, they being like the experts. There's loss, there's hurt, there's shock, there's numbness, denial, emotional outbursts, anger, fear, searchings, disorganization, panic, guilt, loneliness, isolation, depression, re-entry troubles, new relationships, new strengths, new patterns, hope, affirmation, helping others, and then loss adjustment. And this is, it's funny because it's so true. This is more what the experience is like of grief if you ask anybody that works in grief. And then underneath that, grief, I've learned, is really just love. It's all the love you want to give but cannot. All of that unspent love gathers in the corners of your eyes, the lump in your throat, and in the hollow part of your chest. Grief is just love with no place to go. The bitterest tears shed over graves are for words left unsaid and deeds left undone. Read that again. You are braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think. The reality is you will grieve forever. You will not get over the loss of a loved one. You will learn to live with it. You will heal and you will rebuild yourself around the loss you have suffered. You will be whole, but you will never be the same again, nor should you be the same, nor should you want to. Life has to end, love doesn't. So those are my favorite quotes. Hopefully you find them inspirational. Here's my contact information. That's my personal email, my cell phone number. If you guys have anything that you want to talk to me about this presentation, about your life, about where you're at in the grieving process, about things that might be challenging for you, I'm here for you. This is our community. This is our safe space. No judgment. And there's no such thing as like a bad thought, a bad emotion. Just know that. Yeah. Thank you for coming today. I appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to be here.